wait, I'm still unhappy and I'm like doing the thing that I've always wanted to do. Burnout just comes from like a misalignment in like your values, your behaviors, your thoughts. My definition of success is like feeling like a 10 out of 10 in all of the different areas of my life. Feeling of joy, again, like will attract success. The only way you can like really know how you're feeling or what you're thinking is by like,
We have episode 18. We have Dan on the podcast. Welcome, man. It's a pleasure to have you here on today.
yeah, thanks for having me on, man. You've had some cool guests, so I'm honored to be here.
Yeah, it's funny because when I first started my online journey, kind of posting online and meeting people, you were one of the first people I've met. I think through mutual like people that we look up to in Austin, Texas. So
Yeah.
it's just cool following along your journey for the past, like half a year or so and just seeing the amazing things that you've been doing. So, it's an honor. So the first thing I want to get into, which you recently completed, was your 100-miler ultra marathon. And that is such a remarkable feat. As a marathoner myself, hearing the word 100-miler, it's like such a far step out of, just the 26.2 miles that it's almost like incomprehensible to kind of even think about just the sheer amount of miles that you have to run.
Yeah.
And for someone who might be interested in doing ultra marathons in the future, could you kind of go through? Oh no, my light turned off. What? Could you kind of go through um your process on like training, hydration, nutrition, and all of that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I could start at the beginning. I guess like when I started it, part of this was like an effort to like get back in shape because I like biked cross country, done a couple of fitness things and was generally like on top of my fitness, but wanted to get back to like this mode where I was a savage. So I was maybe working out like 3 to 5 hours like when I first started and like doing 15 miles a week. So I was really like building back up to a place where I'm like, I guess like an athlete as just like just for funsies. So it was like kind of a grind, just like building up the mileage. I think at the end, my peak mileage was around like 80 miles. I was running maybe 5 days a week. So like 10 miles Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Saturdays were my back-to-back long runs. Well, towards the end.
Mhm.
And then yeah, I didn't really get into like the nutrition and the hydration. Like I didn't like learn a lot of that knowledge until I attempted a 50 miler on my birthday. It
Mm.
also happened to be self-supported and at midnight, so that was naive, I suppose. There really wasn't many gas stations. I just again didn't really know how much I needed to ingest food and nutrition
Mhm.
wise. But after that, I realized like okay, like I do actually have to drink anywhere from like 13 to 26 ounces of fluids per hour. Eat like 200 to 300 calories per hour to like make sure I'm having energy, certain X amount of carbs and whatever. So once I actually started to do that and like get on top of the fueling, both like before, during, and after, like it training just got so much easier. I felt better. It was a lot more fun. But definitely like the first like 6 months where I was just like grinding, like adding random speed workouts here and there and like lifting. I was like all over the place. And honestly, it was like kind of shitty, even though it was like exciting
Mhm.
for a bit. But it was also like a bit too stressful. So once I like trimmed it back, focused on the running, focused on lifts that complemented like injury prevention, and like worked on rest and recovery and nutrition and all that. Much better. I got faster. I ran longer, and I was much more consistent.
Yeah, I think I saw on your Strava account how you're doing back-to-back marathons for your
Yeah.
long runs. I think that was pretty insane. And could you kind of go through like your mindset, maybe like 1 or 2 days leading up to the race, and then what were you feeling before? Because I imagine, at least when I ran my first marathon, that euphoric feeling that you feel before right at the start line, that is one of the most special
Yeah.
feelings in the entire world. So could you kind of go through like your mindset and how you're feeling at that time?
Yeah, the mindset was really rough, honestly, because I had had the
Mm.
worst week of sleep like leading up to the race in probably the past 6 months. And like in
Oh.
all of my prep and all of like, I was writing down like affirmations of like you're not gonna like you're gonna want to quit, you're not going to, your legs may feel like they're broken, they're not. So, but I didn't prepare for like you're gonna have like terrible sleep and you're gonna feel like bozo like heading into the race. So I was just like really caught off guard. So honestly, going into it, I was like pretty frustrated. I did
Mm.
also last minute, like even though I was also feeling bad, like on the bus, I was like, maybe I could do a sub 20 hour finish. And so I just kind of made up a goal,
Uh-huh.
which was tough for the first 10 miles. And then I realized like this is dumb. Maybe I'll just go back to the sub 24. But even that I didn't like really plan for. So I was just like making goals up. But the mindset was like, yeah, I was like pretty much a slog heading into it. I will say I was like just trying to keep it like level headed. I'm moving at like zone two for the most of the race.
Yeah.
So I guess before with when I was running the New York City Marathon and like doing all these things, I had like so much hype and energy. And I knew this was like going to be much more chill for much longer. So actually like almost didn't want to get too like excited or like in my head about things. It's just like doing my best, like carbo load, sleep, and focus on my plan.
Yeah, because I think the thing with like ultra marathons is like you have to run slow. And I guess maybe for a big chunk of it, it feels pretty chill. But was there a moment where the miles got really tough and where you kind of got into that hypothetical dark place? And what were kind of the
Yeah,
thoughts running through it? Yeah.
yeah, definitely like mile 70 was
Mm.
was rough for me because that was also it was like fully dark at that point. My like legs were starting to cramp, like I was getting tired too, so like the lack of sleep was like catching up to me.
Yeah.
And there was like the psychological standpoint of like, oh man, like I have to grind and execute flawlessly for the next 50 miles. And I think at mile 70 I realized like I don't think I have it in me to do that. So
Mm.
like feeling like I had failed on the sub 24-hour goal in addition to just like all the fatigue like compounded. So I was like just some of the darker thoughts were like, why do I do this to myself? Like, am I doing this for attention? Like, couldn't I have
Yeah.
just done like a 50 miler first? Yeah, an official one, not one that I just made
Yeah.
up. So there were definitely some not so fun thoughts there. And honestly, I like walked most of the next 30 miles from like 70
Mhm.
to 100. But yeah, my feet just like felt like fire and it was just
Oh
like
yeah.
keep moving and keep going.
Yeah, and I feel like the nighttime makes it worse because it's kind of like a physical representation. It's like, oh my God, like now it's like you're really in the dark, and now
Yeah.
you really have to trudge through the dark parts of the race.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I read your morning blog post actually, and you're kind of talking about marathons, and you're saying how you don't run 26.2 plus miles for fun without having some inclination for suffering. And it's
Yeah.
so interesting because we all suffer in life, we all go through like periods of like really difficult times, but some people choose to channel that suffering into something meaningful like a marathon or what you did recently, while
Yeah.
others kind of they just let it pass and maybe they channel into some more unhealthy outlets for that,
Yeah.
as a way of coping. So I think the question is, why do you run? And could you kind of share your story on how you got into running in the first place?
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, I guess I first got into it. I'll share like how I got into it, but I guess also like I so much of my running journey and like why I do it has been because I was also the person who like had a bunch of bad habits and didn't cope
Mm,
well. So this was
yeah,
part of like, okay, I want to change. Like I have been healthy before and I've had healthier habits, and like I want to get
right.
to a place where I am consistent with that more so. So this was more of like a return back to like the person that I knew I could be, and wanted to like pick old and bad habits like out for good. I'm sure I'll fall back into them eventually, but it's more of like a commitment to not do so because I
Mm,
think I did a lot of times unconsciously. So a lot of like the internal work that I've been doing with like therapy, coaching, and all of that has been like an effort to like consciously get to the root of like why these bad habits are even happening and like addressing them head on. And so running was like part of that. Where I started or why I started, I think it was just because like when I was playing football, I was like a fairly heavier, like chubbier kid when I was younger. And I just like
mm,
couldn't run. I hated running.
yeah.
I played football as a lineman because like I was like, okay, I'm like I was working out with this like youth pastor and like gained like 30 pounds in one summer. And I was like freaking massive. I was like maybe the strongest kid my freshman year. So that was cool, and I felt great about that. But eventually, I
Yeah.
was like, I don't really want to be a chubby guy who eats all the time and like just like lifts and is a meathead. So
Hmm.
running was like one an identity thing to like do something that I thought I couldn't do, which is like I never thought I was a runner. and two, it was like an effort to like slim down. And yeah,
Yeah.
not so chubby because I will say like my I've had like body issue images as well, like being
Hmm.
self-conscious of being on the chubbier side.
Yeah, it's really interesting because when I hear stories of people getting into running, and I definitely relate to that, it's like we used to think like, maybe 1 mile or a 5K was so long of a distance.
Yeah.
And then now like as long distance runners, like, oh now we just do a little chill 10K today.
Yeah.
It's like as if it's nothing. So I guess for someone running, what would you what advice would you give them? And I think one thing you stress a lot on is the importance of, zone two training, because that's really where you build that endurance. And
Yeah.
once you have that foundation, it's like, oh my God, your times get much better. You become much more, have greater stamina. So could you kind of
Yeah.
share that piece of advice you have?
Yeah. And I will say, I think the zone two running, I don't know if it's like misunderstood, but I think like maybe
Mm,
the main purpose of it that a lot of people miss out is like if you have a ton of volume and you're training a bunch, like it helps to have a lot of your workouts be easy and fun. And I guess like going back to the advice of like what I would recommend, I just remember like so much of my life, like, but including the running, just like being a grind. And I'm like, I was just this like warrior in hell, like fighting demons. And it was
uh-huh.
like, it's not fun. It's like,
Yeah.
not super chill.
Mhm.
So I would say like, maybe that's necessary sometimes, like if you're in that
Uh-huh.
phase of your
For
life,
sure,
but
for sure.
also the more you can like have fun and like focus on enjoying your workouts or runs and focus on the consistency piece, then like the intensity can like come later and you'll like be more consistent and maybe you won't have so many demons to fight in the first
Mhm.
place. But yeah, that would be maybe my recommendation.
Yeah, it's like sometimes you just gotta rip at it, you know. And
Yeah,
I feel like running is just a good channel for that.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, and pivoting, maybe we could kind of go towards like your backstory. I think you're saying how you're kind of born into a Korean immigrant family, and I think that I read also that I think one of your relatives were from North Korea that actually came out of that country. So that is like a pretty wild story just in of itself. So
yeah.
could you kind of share like your upbringing on how kind of that shaped your childhood and maybe later down the road for you as well?
Yeah. I think the main thing is that like both like sides of my family were both like very religious and like both actually had that same it seemed like traumatic experience of like leaving their parents behind in North Korea.
Mm,
The one thing is I don't really speak Korean, they don't really speak English, so it has been like hard to like communicate and like really know what's
yeah.
going on. So a lot of it has been like just interpretation, like looking at it through my lens now. But I think my parents would agree, like they were both like their parents or my grandparents were both like very strict and like harsh. So yeah, I would say like that is how I grew up and they grew up. And so very harsh, like very just like religious, and like that was like the one thing that both of them were like fervent about. I think my
Mm,
grandparents on my mom's side was like a military chaplain. So he was like in the military when
gotcha.
he went to South Korea, and then like ministered to the soldiers there. And then actually, my dad and my uncle on my mom on his side were both pastors too, because I guess his
Mm,
parents wanted them to be fervent believers as
yeah.
well. There was just like a very intense focus on like this is the way of life, like this is what we care about, and this is it. So it made it hard to like explore, express like any other viewpoints outside of that because that was like all that
Mm,
seemed to matter. And so growing up with that was like a bit of a challenge because like Halloween was evil.
gotcha.
Going
Yeah,
out was
yeah.
like that. There was like a very sheltered, I guess, or like single-minded like point of
Mm,
view. And so that was like tough to like break out of.
mm. How was that breaking out process like? Like, was there, I imagine like as we age, we kind of get to a point where we kind of become more aware of like, the scripts and the customs that we've grown up with. And what did you kind of learn to kind of balance that and actually begin, you know, using your own judgment to see, what is the best thing I want for my life? Like, how is
Yeah.
that process like?
Yeah, messy, very messy.
Uh-huh.
Conversations with
Yeah.
parents, a lot of like thinking I'm gonna go to ministry and like become a pastor myself, and another time thinking like, man, the world is meaningless, like blips on means absolutely
Hmm.
nothing, and God isn't real. So I think that's like a good mirror to like my mental health, where there were these like extreme lows where like nothing meant anything, and then also like God is like the answer and the only solution, and I have to save every single soul. I think what helped, and like Jordan Peterson, I guess, was like one of the later
Mm,
thought leaders that like really helped me come to like a more, I don't know, I don't even know if evolutionary standpoint of like religion is the best way to term it, but like it's just seemed like religion evolved because like societies believe things, and then some societies like won and that those survived, but like those themes have like generally pervaded throughout history, and so you can kind of see how it evolves. So it's like I think that just showed me like the importance of religion, and like the spirit of it is true, although like the facts and figures and like this god and that god may have changed. There is this like general consensus that religion or spirituality or these like myths or fables are important because societies have believed in one version of a god or another for as long as we've been around.
mm. Yeah, I think when I hear like people who've grown up religious, I guess in the sense that maybe their parents believed in the religion, like I think like take Christianity for example. I feel like some people like they kind of get out of the whole Christianity world when they get older, and then they kind of come to their own judgments, like, oh, is God actually real? And then they come back to Christianity later on as kind of like another season. And I'm curious to hear kind of um your journey with faith, because I know you also wrote in your blog post today that you kind of were wrestling with that topic. So where do you stand in your faith in God today? And how did you kind of come to terms with that?
Yeah. So I guess like the last time I like, I don't know, left God, I wouldn't even, it wasn't like an intentional choice, but I think
Mm,
coming back from my bike trip, um, how things left off for me, like faith wise, was there was like a Christian mentor who like both inspired me to go on the trip, but then like we kind of like lost touch, and he was like very slightly different, I guess, from my dad. And like that was also an aha moment of like, wait, these are both people I admire and they both believe very different things about Christianity. So it's like it's all just kind of made up. Like
mm.
people choose to believe whatever they want to believe. And it's like,
Yeah.
I don't want to say nothing is real, but there are just like a lot of parts of it that aren't real. So that was also a weird part where like right before I left for my bike trip, it was like I knew Christianity was like important and helpful, but also it was like, but I don't really know what it means and like where I stand. So like after I came back, I was just like thinking of like I want to keep this like feeling of like loving life and like being as like happy and like in heaven going. And I was like, well, I better make as much money as possible in the next 5 years. So it's like so I can have
Mhm.
another experience like that or something.
Yeah.
Um, which didn't turn out so well. And I kind of like lost faith or lost a connection with like my core values and like just what mattered to
Mm,
me on a deeper level. So I think that's why I also like struggled a lot over the past five or from like 25 years old to like 30 years old because I was just like chasing, I don't know, money. I didn't really wasn't really working on any deeper issues and all of that. And then how I came back, I guess I hit my like turning 30 years old crisis, realized I had like missed this part of myself, and I wish I could say like I went back to God and like wanted to be like, oh, like this is super interesting,
mm.
but he just I don't know the idea of him or like he popped up like however you want to interpret it.
Right.
He just like came through like a Huberman podcast where Huberman was saying like he prayed, and I was obsessed with Huberman, and then I was also obsessed with like Deion Sanders or Coach Prime. He
Mm,
talks about God. I'm like, why are all these people I'm looking up to like talking about God? It just like felt like he was poking back into my life, like without me asking, which also felt significant because like that's literally the story of the Bible is like just people like always like moving away from God, and then he like kind of comes back and moving away. So I was like, oh, like am I just like a classic example of like what's happening in the Bible?
mm,
So that's what also like almost gave me more confirmation that it was like real or there was some significance to these stories. So I would say I'm like more curious than ever. Like I pray, I don't know, before meals and like in the morning and at night, and try to read the Bible and like some devotionals and whatnot. So I wouldn't say I'm like, going to be a monk or anything, but it is part of like my daily practice.
hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of jumping off points here. It's like I think what you mentioned earlier, it's like how two people can have such a subjective view on like a singular fate, and it kind of makes you question like what is like the objective truth in all of this, you know?
Right.
And I feel like people say like, oh gosh, just a way of like a fictional character that we create in our minds just as a way to cope. And I hear all these like things. It's like, okay, what is actually true? So how are you kind of approaching like your journey on finding what the objective truth is? Because I imagine like a lot of us are kind of searching after, what is actually true and what is not, you know.
Yeah. It's a good question. I guess kind of like a daily thing. I guess there's like the practice that I'm doing now, and it like doesn't take up like too much time, but I guess I do it because I know it generally gives me some peace of mind to like surrender or like let go of things. Like that has also been a big theme, which I just
Mm,
kind of bucket in the spiritual realm of things. Like you can like classify it any certain way, but I just like, kind of choose to put it there. Um, and then I guess like just whatever works. Like if it's
uh-huh.
helping me and like moving me towards like my goals or like giving me a deeper sense of connection or joy. So I think there's like a bit of like am I actually seeing tangible results? Am I actually like feeling something like deeper? Like again,
Mm,
whether it's like even a sad emotion, maybe I feel like sad emotions can be spiritual in a sense, or like
yeah, yeah.
happiness. I think it's like in the people I surround myself with too. So I feel like for me, God is like in I don't know people, connections, and all these like I don't know beautiful music.
Hmm.
So I find I gravitate towards those things, and if it like brings me that deeper like sense that like this is something beautiful or bigger than me, I feel like that's true to me, and like my feelings and my sub like what I know to be true is like how I feel and like how helpful it is to me. So
Mm. Yeah, I
I think
think
it's very
yeah.
personal.
Yeah. I think when I interviewed Tiger Cho, he was saying how he's kind of a pragmatist. He
Yeah,
kind of like he may not know all the answers to like a like for example for Christianity, but as long like it helps benefit his life, that's what he's gonna keep on following. So I think you kind of
yeah,
offer a similar view in that sense.
yeah,
As you're saying how like when you've kind of going through that difficult period of time between like 25 to 30, that you're kind of missing that feeling of being alive when you were biking across America, which is like an incredible feat.
yeah.
Like I think I hope to do something similar to that as well. But and you were saying how much aliveness you felt during that experience. Could you kind of share that journey into it and what kind of prompted you to go on this, really ambitious quest that not
Yeah.
many people would actually want to do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was also born of a quarter life crisis. So yeah, I
Uh-huh.
think 24-ish years old, I was like, man, I'm turning 25. That feels like a big year. I'm
Mm,
like, assuming I make it to 100, I'm like a fourth dead. And I was just like unhappy. So I wanted to do something that was just like totally different from what I was doing, which was like working at a job I didn't love and like living with my parents and like, I had never traveled abroad and like one of my best friends is like a, super inspirational figure and he's also done ultras and like traveled and, and done all
mm,
these things.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think as I was like kind of like thinking about what to do next, like how to get out of this like rut that I was in, I found my eighth grade journal where I was like, I want to bike across the country. And
Yeah.
at the time, it was just a joke. I was like, still, again, like a very insecure, shy, like very goofy kid. I would think I
Yeah.
would just do things for attention because I didn't know how to like be normal. So I was just like a weird guy. But there
Mm,
was a truth there. I think because I didn't like myself, that was like, oh, like bike across Dan would be fucking cool. Like people love him. And so I wanted to be him. So I guess like as I was 24, like looking back at this younger version of me wanting to be somebody else or like enjoy like somebody who liked himself, I was like, okay, like let me go do that. So I did it. It was cool. The first month again, I was like a lot of pressure to like bike hard and like go crazy. So you can
yeah.
see a recurring theme with me to just like push beyond normal capacities. So that was tough. But then the next 3 months, like once I was chill, like having fun, it was just there was like a bunch of physical challenges I would do. I would meet a bunch of people. I'd knock on doors. Explore all the nooks and
Mm,
crannies like the country. Just meet a bunch of weirdos. Share a meal with them and yeah, just do crazy shit like biking 200 miles a day. And it was just
see.
really fun.
Yeah.
And there were definitely bad days where I'm like, ugh, like maybe I can't bike, up to Pikes Peak in under 4 hours and climb whatever
Yeah.
1,000 feet in 2 hours.
Hmm.
But that was like it was like one bad day out of like 30. So it's just like a very stark contrast because I think life before
Mm.
that was like maybe I'd have like 2 or 3 good days or 5 good days out of like 25. And I was just like generally depressed and like not super fun having a good time. So yeah.
Awesome. what was the route you took? Did you go from like West Coast to East Coast? And could you kind of share some of the craziest challenges that you did, or some of the craziest memories
Yeah.
from the trip? Yeah.
Yeah, I went east to west. So I started in
Mm,
Yorktown, Virginia, and then basically just went straight west to like Denver, Colorado. So that's where
mm,
I like decided I might want to live here. And then
yeah.
I went up like northwest, like through Wyoming, Yellowstone National Park, Grand Tetons, to Astoria, Oregon by the coast.
Mhm.
And then I actually extended my trip. That was like the original plan was just go coast to coast, but then I
Right.
went down the Pacific Coast Highway down to my friend who was staying in Phoenix, Arizona. So it ended up being like a kind of a question mark. Crazy memories. I mean, the Pacific Coast Highway was just crazy in general. Like
Mm,
if somebody's never been there, it's like the most I thought was the most beautiful part of the country. Like the redwoods are like alien like things.
yeah.
Like the coast is beautiful, and to much of my dismay, it was not flat. So it was actually surprisingly the most climbing I did, only because it was like very up and down, like very
Mm,
frequently. So it had more elevation gain actually than like the Rocky Mountains and all of that. So
wow.
that was crazy. Yeah, I did 200 miles in a day. I did 1,000 miles over 10 days. So like I guess the average of like 10 centuries in 10 days. Um, Knocking on people's like doors to like camp in their lawn felt like cool. That was like a fun way for me to like push myself out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like met some of my good friends too. Like one of my good friends I met, she just like popped out of the woods in Grand Tetons National
Mhm.
Park, and we just like hung out by the campfire, and we like kept in touch. So it was like cool to like make those relationships. Like we met up back up in like California, stayed in touch on the East Coast, and then I roomed with her in Denver too. So
Mm.
yeah, it's a beautiful
Yeah,
trip.
it sounds like a also a great place to like scout where you want to live in the future. It's like,
Yeah,
oh, why not
definitely.
just go a bike ride across the country, just find some locations that I might like and go from there. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, and it's really cool because I think when we reach like an old age, we kind of look back on these memories. It's like I can either live a really interesting life doing all this cool shit, or I can just live in, just a pretty forgettable life. It's like both, there's no right or wrong way to live life, but it's like,
yeah,
but the question is like, how do you want to make life as interesting as possible? So when you look back on it, it's just amazing memories just dotted in your memory, in your mind. So I think another one that stood out was your travels to South America.
yeah,
So could you kind of that's like a really like I guess foreign place to many of our minds.
yeah,
So where did that idea start? And could you also share your experience from that trip?
yeah. So that was actually, I guess, like the trip I did before the bike across the country. So I think I
Yeah.
did biking in 2018 from like I don't know May to September, something around those lines. And then South America was 2017. I guess during the winter time.
Mhm.
To spring or fall to spring. And that too was like a result of me turning 24. That was like the original catalyst, honestly. I think
Mm.
the biking across the country came after that because like once I did the South America trip, I was like, oh, like I don't know if I want to go back to work yet. I still have money. Like, why don't I do that after South America? So South America was actually, I just remember like looking at pictures of like Machu Picchu in like I don't know history class in like middle school or high
Yeah.
school. I was like, that was actually maybe the main catalyst of like, oh man, my life is like a disaster. I don't know what to do. So I booked my flight to like Machu Picchu. Then I was like, okay, well, I got to get there somehow. I made a plan to go from like Ecuador down to Argentina and like Colombia.
Mm.
Um, and so, yeah, that was actually, yeah, that was an interesting trip.
Yeah. I guess from all your trips, or from biking across America, from your trip to South America, what were some insights that you've gained from that trip that you otherwise previously would have not?
Yeah, that was definitely an eye-opening. So one like conversation that like sticks out was like when
Yeah.
I met up with my friend and in Machu Picchu or Cusco, the town before.
Mhm.
She's like, "Oh, how's your trip been?" And I was like, honestly, it's like I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of struggling. I'm like going to these parties like in hostels and like I don't really party, and I'm going to these museums and I don't even like museums. So I felt like I was like didn't know how to travel, and but I was like doing it, and so it was like awkward. I was like the first time I had like all this total freedom in my life,
Mm,
and it was this realization that like, wait, I'm still unhappy, and I'm like doing the thing that I've always wanted to do, this like crazy thing. So that was like a realization that like, oh, like the problem is like within me, like I'm the one who's struggling here.
mm,
And so it's like, you can't run away from your problems. You have to just kind of work on them. So that was like the first big insight there. I would definitely say also like going on all these like multi-day hikes was like just like I was like probably the happiest when I was doing those things. So again, it wasn't like the museums, it wasn't the partying. Maybe I was doing it with like some people, but sometimes it was also alone. It was just like realizing how much like movement and nature and like solitude really filled my soul. So it just gave me a deep appreciation for like nature and like physical.
mm.
I don't even call it exercise because I was just like slowly hiking. But it was those kind of like meandering walks that like gave me a deeper appreciation for nature and all those things. Um, and then towards the end of the trip in Colombia, as I was thinking about like, oh, I kind of feel like a nomad without a home and like some homeless person, like just a vagrant. Um, I was like taking salsa classes. I rented an Airbnb for a month and all of that. So like that felt nice too. I think like as I was traveling, there was like this desire to have like a home base and like explore new things because I was like, basically just bopping around like every couple of days for the past 5 months, and that also felt like meaningless in a way. It was fun, but also there was like a desire for some stability. So that was like a nice takeaway from the trip too. That like it's tough to just like be completely like stable and like have these routines and like just consistency and predictability, but it's
Hmm.
also hard to like just be constantly nomading around and like having all these like I don't know
Right.
crazy experiences that like aren't really what I wanted to be doing and like wasn't really me. So it showed me I wanted like a mix of both, like spontaneity and new things, but also like very consistency and like a place I could call home.
I love those reflections. And you did all of this like was it all solo traveling?
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. That's really amazing because like for someone who may be on the verge of taking that leap on going on that crazy adventure or that crazy experience, how would you how would you kind of advise them to, just take that leap of faith? Because I imagine like when you're solo traveling, I read this somewhere, it's like that is when you exercise the greatest agency of your own individual will. It's like now you're kind of proving to yourself that, oh, I can do these difficult things, and since I'm capable of doing other things as well. So how can someone take that leap of faith to actually going for it?
Yeah. Um I mean, the only thing I can say for me is that like one thing I was really worried about because I used to be a recruiter in New York City, and I was like, oh, if I take this year off, like my resume is going to be horrible, and
Mm,
nobody's going to want to hire me. And there was
yeah.
that genuine fear. And so I think Tim Ferriss was like the only podcaster and like hottest guy at the time, not physically, although he's attractive. He had this like fear setting exercise of like what is the worst case scenario that could happen.
Mm,
I was like, well, like I guess I'd just be like a waiter or server and I was like making good money and I was like happy. Like I really enjoyed that. So it's like, yeah, it wouldn't be ideal, but like it would also wouldn't be the worst case scenario. Like I'm already unhappy like in this job I hate in New York City. So I was like, once I did that, that like gave me permission that like my life would probably be better after this trip anyway. And then it turns out like I actually got my dream like tech sales job and like I just had so much confidence. So I didn't like expect myself to like transform in like all these intangible ways where like I could achieve everything I wanted or like at least believe that I
mm,
could. Um, so that was like a very unexpected outcome that like, oh, like taking this leap of faith actually helped me get closer to like everything that I wanted. And I did. Like I struggled to get a tech sales job before that. And then like I landed a sick job after.
hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. And you were saying how you were living in New York City. I think it was working at a startup during that time.
Yeah.
And I was hearing your story on how you were just hustling and grinding. And I feel like we all have that phase, but what did you kind of learn from that experience?
Um, what did I learn from that experience? I mean, I was really just like, I think my passion carried me through that role.
Mm,
It was like my desire to like actually help people and like connect with them.
mm,
So I think one thing that stuck out for me from that like phase of my life was like how I made deep connections with like some of the people I was trying to recruit. And like that's how I met my like Christian mentor. That's like how I met
Mm,
another friend who like, got a job at LinkedIn. And it was really interesting because he had like kind of a sus resume, but like somebody gave me advice like just work with the candidates who like you believe in and like are nice to you and all of that. And he was very
yeah.
respectful, very timely, and I'm like, something's weird here because like his resume is like pretty like ugly and like, but I just like feel like he's a good person. So we like had this great
Hmm.
relationship. I advocated for him in the interview process, and then he ended up getting like this sick job at LinkedIn like without my help. But he was like really
Yeah.
appreciative for me for taking that bet on him.
Hmm.
So I resonate with that a lot too, just like in my case too, because I feel like my background is like kind of weird or unconventional. And like, I don't know, I just like wanted people to like take a bet on me. And like maybe sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. But like every time somebody did, it like felt really meaningful and like meant a lot and like helped me
Mm.
kind of transform and become the best version of myself. So um I think that was like a really significant, I guess like the Christian mentor was the one who did that for me.
Yeah.
So I guess it was like two examples of like me doing it for somebody else and somebody else doing it for me. So yeah, that was like a beautiful, I guess, story of like just investing in people who maybe hidden gems that
Mm.
are just overlooked.
Yeah, I think a concept that I learned a lot recently was, how you want to become an open hand. You want to extend that help to other people and you just keep on giving, giving, giving. And then magically in return, like cool things happen to you.
Yeah,
And it's just one of the cool, maybe like forces in life that continue to operate in many of our lives today.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say the more hidden gems you can invest in, you'll have more
Yeah.
people investing in you.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to pivot now to something that you briefly mentioned earlier on how, you can go on these cool experiences. You can go travel different places, but in the end, you can't run away from yourself. You can't
Yeah,
run away from your problems. And at some point you have to, really look at yourself, your inner self face to face and really have an honest conversation with yourself. And, you were saying how like your biggest advice you'd give to your 25-year-old self was to kind of get into therapy earlier.
yeah.
And, as someone who has never done therapy before, maybe it's like an ego thing, but like, what would you recommend for people who might are thinking of getting into that and why you believe so much in the power of therapy?
Yeah. I would say I think about this a lot too, just because like my therapist, I've been with her for like 3 years too, and
Mhm.
sometimes I'm like, could I find a better one? Is there somebody else like
Yeah.
out there for me? So even as I'm working with a therapist, I'm like questioning how to best work with a therapist or like what the value is. So
Mm.
um, I think a part of me also just like fundamentally believes that like people are valuable, and so might sound like a weird reason to start therapy, but for me, it's like one thing that keeps me going is like I never want to become the person or like get to a place where I think like because somebody doesn't have a certain like set of like qualifications or experiences, like they're not helpful. And so I firmly believe in the like the idea that like you can learn from anybody and everybody. Doesn't
Mm.
mean you necessarily should, but I think for the hour that I spend with my therapist for BetterHelp, it's like almost a practice of like, well, what can I learn today from this she's a woman, this woman, and what is it showing about myself? So even if though, she's not some like sick Harvard PhD psychologist who has these crazy techniques and like is a Tony Robbins type person,
Yeah.
like what can I learn from her? And I think there is like the more I've like sat with that intention,
Mm.
the more I see that value in myself and others, that people do have just like inherent value, um, outside of, amazing skills and work ethic and all these other things. So,
Yeah. It's
like,
like
I don't know if that's
sometimes,
a good question,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
I would say it's rare, I guess, to go back to your question, it's rare to like spend an hour with somebody who just is like entirely focused on helping you. And like maybe they're good at it, maybe they're not, but you can also learn something from your ability to learn from somebody who may not
Mm.
be perfect. And I think that teaches you a lot about yourself.
Mhm. Yeah, it's like sometimes like we're so in our caught up in our own heads, in our own minds, that it's so helpful to have someone from the outside perspective maybe
Right.
shine their light on like something that you might be facing and going through. So I think there is like tremendous value in that, just having that external source, providing that new perspective that we sometimes would have otherwise missed. So maybe that's the value that you're trying to go after here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
there was this writer on Quora that I like really loved, and she was talking about this like statistics class she took in like Yale. One of the best writers ever. I think her name was Hannah Yang. She still writes like fiction now. But
Yeah.
she was talking about like how in her statistics class, there was just like a jar of marbles, and like every student had to like guess what it was. And like obviously like everybody was wrong, but the collective answer was like one marble off or like very close. And it was just like a good reminder for me, like a very powerful visualization that like two heads or 50 heads or 100 heads is like usually better than one. So yeah. And again, maybe you have an outlier therapist who's like the one person who guessed like one marble and there's like
Mhm.
clearly 250, but it's like if you're still working with them, it's like what are you doing? So again, it's like people are just mirrors and like what you can learn from them, and that interaction is like so powerful too.
Yeah, I love that analogy. And from that, I guess you also started your own coaching practice, quarter life.
Yeah.
And how's that been, man? Like I know now you're the one who's kind of helping out people, not just receiving it. So how has that experience been so far?
Yeah, it's still quite new. Like I have been
Yeah.
recovering, like, processing the race and all of that. So I'm just like starting to like ramp up calls. I've been having a couple like intro calls and like building out my like program, I suppose. So it's
Mhm.
been interesting just to like build and like create something new and like trust that like a lot of my, I don't know, sales skills and like intuition and like my experiences too can like help these people. So it's fun. It does feel like an adventure and like has a lot of the elements like from the bike trip that I like felt were missing because it feels like very creative and it's like trusting and like risky and all these things. So it's cool.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I feel like sometimes like at least for me from my own perspective, like I'm a huge perfectionist. Like I need to have a structure and a plan because I want to give the most value to someone else. And for someone like in a coaching call, it's like you don't really understand what's going on in their life until they actually begin to express it. So how can you help them in the best way possible while being, very reciprocative to their thoughts and how they're feeling?
Yeah. Uh, Could you expand on that last part? What do you mean by like reciprocative to their thoughts and feelings?
Because I feel like sometimes like if we want to go into a call, we want to have a whole map of a plan, like the best
Mhm.
ways to help them. But obviously it doesn't really turn out that way. It's like
Yeah.
you don't really know what's going on until they actually begin to say what they really want to say. And you kind of have to kind of go with the flow of what they're saying. And how do you best kind of navigate that flow and really be present when they actually begin
Yeah.
expressing themselves?
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
So actually, so it's funny, like when I started the coaching practice, I don't know, the one thing I've actually haven't done
yeah.
both as a coach and like somebody being coach is like go through a very structured program. So I got in my head about that. I was like, oh, I want to create that. And like actually I do want to create that, but I think what's made coaching so powerful for me and just
Uh,
like sales in general is like this like very flexible kind of like read the room and the other person type soft skill and ability
mm,
to like tune into like what's happening in the moment. So it's like you have the plan, but like you have to kind of get ready to like discard it at any moment too, because like what's happening in front of you is like always more important. So I would say it's that. I just like kind of revert back to that. I do want to build out like a very structured program and all of that, but I also like want to. I never want to forget that like what the most important thing is like being present on the call and tuning into like what is this person needing, what
mm,
are they feeling, what are they looking for, and like giving that. And so I'm actually part of this like community called Illuvians. It's like first salespeople to master their like inner game craft of sales and community. And
yeah.
a lot of what we do there is like it's going to sound weird, but it's called like relational presencing, where we literally just like eye gaze and like we talk about our thoughts and feelings and emotions and like how our
Mm,
body's feeling. But it really helps people like drop into like yeah their
mm,
body and like their hearts and like what their feelings are, because that is like how most of communication is felt. I think the rule is like 7% of the words you say impact people, 35% or something is in like your tone, and then
mm,
55% is body language. So it's like, I don't know, me waving my hand, whatever is happening with my hand
yeah,
here
yeah.
is like probably influencing you more than the words that are coming out of my mouth.
Mm,
And also this like lower tonality that like Chris Voss talks about of like this late night DJ voice. I think what a lot of people forget is like when you speak from your like diaphragm or like a lower tone. Maybe you know this from music, but like when you sing from like a deeper place, it's like just more, I don't know what the word is, authentic, crisp, clear,
Mm,
powerful. And so the more you can like get out of your head and be nasally and all of that, like things that
yeah.
apply to music also translate to like communication and sales and just like influencing or coaching other people. So yeah.
Wow, that's really cool. And something that you
Oh, you like
that's
that? The little sales body language to music.
yeah, it's all interconnected. Yeah. Yeah. And something that I really admire about you is how I think from just reading your writing and everything, is how deeply introspective and aware and really reflective of how you're actually feeling and just thinking. And how can someone be more in tune with their own thoughts and feelings? And I feel like that's a whole skill to kind of cultivate, maybe that's through meditation, through journaling, all that type of stuff. How would you kind of approach that on being just cultivating that sense of awareness?
Yeah. Um, I mean, it's kind of everything you mentioned, right? Like spending a lot of time
Yeah.
alone.
Hmm.
I think the only way you can like really know how you're feeling or what you're thinking is by like doing those, spending time with yourself, uh, in solitude. And so whether that's like lone walks, journaling, listening to music, well, maybe the music thing might be a distraction, but like anything you could do to sit with your feelings and your thoughts and your
Mm.
body and like get in touch with that, the better off you're going to be. And and I think like one thing that stuck out to me is like I think Sahil Bloom was the first one that shared it, or the first one person
Mm.
that I saw was that like time you
Big
spend,
fan. Yeah.
and it's like your friends, your family, and yourself, and it's like you spend the most time with yourself. So I just find it fascinating that so many people struggle with being alone, when they spend most of their time with themselves. So maybe I'm biased because I've spent maybe too much. I've definitely spent too much time alone,
Uh-huh.
but I guess that's my curse is my superpower as well.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, as they say, like you can get too introspective at the same time. You do need introspection to
Yeah.
at least healthy doses of it. And I guess on a similar topic, for anyone, I'm sure you experienced it as well, but for someone dealing with burnouts, maybe in, their job or maybe, as early as like maybe school, but how can someone maybe like approach burnout in a healthy way and actually channel it to make some meaningful change in their lives so they can feel that sense of aliveness and energy in the life that they live?
Yeah. Well, I guess like typically it seems like burnout is like a symptom of doing too much or doing more. So I guess the
Mm,
first thing would be do less
gotcha.
and figure out like a way to like divert that energy into the things that are going to fill you out. Because I think the burnout comes from like putting too much time or energy or like I guess technically you could not even be doing anything because I feel like I burnt myself out just like from my toxic negative thoughts.
Gotcha.
So maybe you're doing is like overthinking negatively in a certain area of your life. But I think the more you can divert, again, like time, energy, like physical behaviors to the things that like give you more joy or energy, is going to be important. And I think like maybe a tangible example of that is like maybe, you're becoming a dad and like you're, spending 10 hours a day at work, but like
Right.
you don't change that behavior, but deep inside, you want to carve out like an hour or two for like your kids. And so sometimes I think people like face this like cognitive dissonance, and that's where the burnout comes from because their actions aren't aligning with like a certain set of values, and they haven't like taken the time to like process that or figure out and like realign how they want to show up in the world. So I think burnout just comes from like a misalignment in like your values, your behaviors, your thoughts, any like old limiting beliefs that you have about yourself. Um, like maybe this person isn't making time for their kids because they think they're going to be a horrible dad and they don't want to address that, and so they don't even bother to like make the time. So things like that.
Mm,
So really just like that deep internal work of like understanding like how you feel, think, believe about certain things of your life.
yeah. I think misalignment is such a big word here because as someone who also experienced misalignment in my life, it's like painstakingly painful when you live that way. It's like you should be doing this and you should be living this way, but you're living the other way. And now it's like, how can you bridge or kind of like fuse the two together to make it as aligned as close together as possible? And that takes some serious inner work. And I guess burnout, as you mentioned, is kind of like a sign of that misalignment. So I think, yeah, you touched on a really good point here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, part of you wants feels like maybe you should be going to school and like spending X amount of times in classes or studying. And then maybe
Yeah.
a part of you is like, this is a waste of time and I should be spending more time in my entrepreneurial endeavors and whatever. So I think that's where like parts work has been helpful is like realizing there are these two different parts of you. One that maybe
Mm.
believes that like something is helpful for you, but like this part does not. And so it's like if they're like a family, I guess parts work is a part of IFS. Have you heard of interfamily systems? Anyway,
I,
interfamily systems is the
yeah.
idea that like there are different parts. It's like a family, and so I guess like you Justin as the leader of your different parts in your family, it's like how do
Mm.
you get these two to like come to a solution that satisfies them both, and like reconciles the conflict that is happening in them right now because I think they're both competing for your time and attention and energy,
Right.
and that is where the painstaking misalignment comes from.
No, I love that. It's like pretending that you have a little family inside of you, metaphorically
Yeah,
speaking. And then he's like, oh, how do you get these different, family members to cooperate and who gets more attention, more time, and how, yeah, it's just, everything's interconnected. I love that
yeah,
analogy, by the way.
yeah. It's a
Yeah.
little negotiation. Like right now, you're they're competing for resources. So, uh,
Yeah. And something else I want to ask is like with your coaching is how do you know what rate to charge and how do you kind of own up to that rate?
well, you charge what you think you're worth, and
Hmm.
then
Yeah.
if you don't say it confidently, then maybe you have to do some internal work to figure out
Yeah.
what's going on. So
Hmm.
it really is like pricing is such a sensitive and like personal manner. So it really depends on like what a person believes they're worth, and can like confidently show and like deliver on. Um, so it is a balance between like what are people willing to pay for and
Yeah.
like am I closing anybody like at this price. Like I could have all the conviction in the world and like not make any money, but I do. So somebody would want to adjust their pricing
Mm.
accordingly. So I think like anything, maybe treat it like an experiment and like be methodical about like okay, is everybody like signing up for this price and like can I raise it? Great, like let me go do that. Is like nobody
Yeah.
signing up, all of that, then let's lower it. So kind of just depends. I think it's like a
Yeah.
evolving thing as well.
Mhm. And I guess it's also kind of like how much do you believe in yourself at the same time? It's like if you believe that you're, worth a good amount, it's like now you can actually be like really, adamant about that bar. But it does take some inner work to, really set that rate.
Yeah.
And what are some things that you learned in sales that kind of translated well over to what you're doing right now? Like anything that particularly comes to mind?
Pretty much everything. I think I
Uh-huh.
forget who I heard it from or what I think Mark Cuban says like sales is like the best skill you can do. I think I heard in
Right.
like company building, it's like product and sales are the two most important things. Like you
Yep.
have the thing you're gonna sell and then you sell it and then you just kind of rinse and repeat. Tactically, I would say sales, um, yeah, it just like really helps me focus. Like the one thing I love about sales is how metrics driven it is. So it's like you either hit your quota or you don't. So it's like very black
Mm.
and white, like whether you're successful or not. And I kind of like that binary element of it. And then when it comes down to like the actual sales, like calls and like when you're talking to a human being, it's very not binary. And so it's
Yeah.
like process overall is like very black and white, but there's such like an art to the science so that you really do have to like be good with humans and read emotions and like all those like soft skills that like people think are not as like valuable as hard skills. And so I appreciate how it like combines the best of both worlds. Like to
Awesome.
be a good salesperson, you have to know your numbers and you also have to be, uh, you know, charismatic or whatever that means.
Yeah, I think it's something that like a skill that takes a lot of reps. And clearly that's something that you've been doing for a good amount of time. So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
that's all it takes.
yeah. And let's pivot to some, last questions. And I'm curious to hear now that after, going through all these experiences in your life, what does success mean to you? Like how would you define success right now?
Yeah, um, I'm really attracted to. So going back to like the bike trip.
Yeah.
That was it. Like that was the essence of how I want to feel for the rest of my life. I define it as like a 10 out of 10.
Mm,
I was just like, there's this constant sense of like growth, achievement, like connection with others. Um, and so I think the challenge has been like life is a lot more complicated than just biking and eating and sleeping. And so, like, I guess part of the reason coaching was attracted to me is like there's like this wheel of life that there's like seven different categories that you care about in life, which is like work, finances, physical hobbies, like friends, well, your relationship with yourself, all those different things.
right.
So I guess like my definition of success is like feeling like a 10 out of 10 in all of the different areas of my life. And it's just like making sure that those areas are aligned to that vision. Because, no matter how much money amount of money that I have or friends that I have, it's like it really is a subjective thing. Like
Yeah.
biking is a very simple thing. So I think the more I can like simplify my life and the more I can feel great, the easier, better it will be, and like more likely I'll have more objective success. So I guess success to me just like looks like living in that like state of like pure bliss
Mm,
all the time. And
yeah.
so that means I have to like actually maybe not try to make $1 million in a year and like maybe run less. I think as I learned with ultramarathon training, like sometimes less is more and slowing down helps me to go faster. So I
Mhm.
think a lot of those lessons of like living simply, feeling that like joy, sense of joy, is success and will both like lead to more success.
Feeling that joy, it's like elevating in the map of consciousness.
Was that?
Elevating in the map of
Yeah.
consciousness.
Effervescence, is that
Yeah,
is that the top tier, I think?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
All these like really like, spiritual words on the top, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned now your vision is to love God, love others, and love myself, which was taken from a verse in the Bible. So how did you kind of come to that vision?
Yeah, I mean, it really does come back to my Christian roots, and I guess maybe I'm a
Mm,
lazy Christian in that like the 80-20 rule, like Jesus himself said, like these are the most important commandments. So I'm like sick. Like if there's one thing I have to believe, it's the one thing that Jesus said to believe.
yeah.
But I do it like outside of I guess him saying it, like it does feel
Yeah.
true. Like it feels like I don't know, God, however you want to define it, is just like this nebulous, like far away thing. So whether that's like nature, purpose, or these like feelings. And then just like generally when I think about the times I've felt the most down or like most uplifted was like when people were loving on me. So like that's where like that feels like real and
Mm.
true to me is that like other people matter. And then there's me. Like I'll be, I wouldn't experience any of these things without me. So I want to make sure my vessel, my experiences, my mind is all right, so that I can, love God, love other people, and it's just this like little triangle of amazingness.
Yeah, it's a trifecta, connected to yourself, connected to others, connected to a higher
Yeah,
being. Yeah, I
yeah,
love that. Yeah.
yeah,
And the la last question I usually close off with is what advice do you have for a younger Dan who's 80 years old or 19, 20, who wants to do like great things and live an interesting life, what you've been
yeah,
doing? How can someone, maybe get that head start and really get that ball rolling?
yeah. Well, maybe you're talking about yourself. So maybe it is the slowing down and like finding the time to align yourself and really, yeah, unpacking like how can you negotiate better terms for the different parts of you that want different things, and how do you achieve that, and trust that like everything that's happening for you is like exactly where you are and need to be.
Mm.
And that it's like the feeling of joy, the feeling of like bliss is what success is, and again like will attract success. So the more you can like live in that state, um the better off you're going to be.
I love this. Like, I think bliss is such a great word to encapsulate everything. Yeah. Also, where can people find your work? And maybe they're interested in like looking at your writing or your coaching practice. Like, where can people find that?
Yeah, website is dantonahn.com. And that's the best place to look.
All right. Awesome, man. Yeah, it's an honor having you on the pod. It's great to have, have a in-person not in person, but a Zoom
Yeah,
conversation at the very least.
Yeah, you ask great questions. I had a lot of fun. It was, I'm sure I'll be thinking about this for the rest of the day. So I appreciate you being so thoughtful.
Yeah, it's a great, great start to the day, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Awesome.